Hello, friends, and welcome to Murder Mavens, a true crime podcast. My name is Lynn, and I've been following the Karen Reed retrial. This is day 3, which was a short day. The jury got dismissed early. We started the day with Daniel Whitley continuing his examination, so I didn't really get too much from him beyond more of the same. So the defense was really just trying to get him to admit to some inconsistencies in his testimony, and the prosecution was trying to essentially show that he's a good guy and was there to help and whatnot, and he has no motivation to be deceptive. So I kind of feel like overall he just seemed like he has no skin in the game. And my take so far is that the defense has really been trying to impeach and show inconsistent testimonies with just about all of the witnesses so far. And so it wasn't any different with him. It feels a little bit nitpicky to me, but I think it is important, though, at the end of the day. The biggest thing that I took away from Daniel Whitley is because he is a first responder, an EMT, and he was there to assess Karen Reed's sort of mental state because she was section 12, and that meant that he was to take her in for temporary psychiatric assessment, because there was a fear that she might actually cause harm to herself. And so you would think that contemporaneously, in the moment on the day of, just as a matter of course of doing his job, that more would have been noted because he had to write a report on the incident. And a lot of the things that all of a sudden are super important now, I feel like if it happened the way and with the importance that he's sort of stressing now, or at least that the prosecution is making a big deal of now, it would have been even more important then. These are things that if they are alarming now, they would have been more so alarming then, and I feel would have warranted actually putting into a report. And yet that didn't happen. And that's the case with a lot of things. There were a lot of things that were never reported. And, if Karen Reed said all of these things, I think I hit him, is John dead, blah, 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 yet none of that's captured in any contemporaneous reports. It's kind of all coming out now after the fact. So then the next 2 witnesses were really fast. Basically, it was a manager of C.F. McCarthy's, Jean, I think maybe Jean Demulis was the C.F. McCarthy's bar manager, and also Bridget Meehan, which was the Waterfall Bar and Grill owner, or one of the owners. And they both watch some video surveillance of their respective bars or restaurant establishments. And basically they were called to authenticate the video footage, because I think what's going to happen is the prosecution's going to play it later. And so he wants to bring in the video clips, have them authenticate that, yes, this is the restaurant that I work at or that I own. And then that's pretty much it. So I think Brendan's a very careful prosecutor, because he's making sure that witnesses are identifying the defendant. So they're having witnesses point to Karen Reed or identify if Karen Reed is sitting in the courtroom, which I think is customary to do. But he's having everybody do that. And I don't think that was done at all in the first trial. And so same with these video clips, he's making sure that somebody of authority, in a position of authority, like the manager, like the owner, authenticates that this is actually the restaurant in question. And there was no cross-examination on either of those witnesses. It was really fast. It was probably less than 5 minutes each. And then the next person to take the stand is Michael Camerano, and the first note I put in as I was watching was that he seems nervous. I don't know for what reason, but he just seemed very nervous. He did testify, I believe, in the first trial, but he's a friend of John's, and he got a call the morning that Karen was like frantic and that she and Carrie and Jen McCabe drove around looking for John. But in doing that, they left John's niece home alone. And so he got a call asking if he could maybe pick up John's niece and take care of her while they were driving around looking for John. And so he does that. And then later that day, he gets a call from Paul, who is John's brother. And he got the news that John passed away. And Paul asked him if he could please bring his niece back home so that she can be with family. And so he does that. It was really touching. It was so sad because he was still very, I think, emotional about the loss of his friend because he and John were buddies. They became friends because their daughters are friends. And so, they hung out together. They were celebrating because Michael's daughter and John's niece had just gotten into some special school, and they were celebrating because the two girls would be kind of going off on this college experience together. And then so that happy celebratory moment is now kind of dampened by the loss of John, and he was quite emotional, and I don't know how much of his nervousness was just that I think he was just trying to be very careful with his words so that he doesn't get picked on by the defense. That's sort of my sense for it. But he did get cross-examined. I thought maybe the defense would leave him alone because it was a very touching, emotional testimony on direct. And but he was crossed. He was crossed by David Yannetti, and he basically testified during cross-examination that by all counts of his, direct observation, John and Karen seemed very happy. That there were a lot of times where they all, with the kids, including Michael's daughter, spent time together, vacation together. There were times when Karen took both girls out, or that the girls were hanging out together and she was sort of the only adult in charge, basically to say that Michael trusted Karen to be in charge of or look out for his daughter, that they had a good relationship, and that while they had arguments or whatever, as I guess most normal couples do, to his knowledge, he did not know that whether or not John was intending on, breaking up with Karen. That seems to be something the prosecution's really leaning heavy on. And that he also testified that on that night, John and Karen seemed happy when they were hanging out at the bar. Then after Yannetti's cross, there's another redirect by Brennan, and I didn't really like this line of questioning, and I don't know if it's like kosher to do because I'm not a lawyer, but he basically seemed to ask a lot of suggestive questions, and the judge did give the jury instructions at the very beginning of the trial that anything the lawyers say should not be taken as evidence of anything. So a lawyer could ask you, are you aware that John broke up with Karen? That could be true and that could not be true. I mean, they could phrase the question however they want. And but in asking the question, that itself should not be taken as evidence. But we are people, we're humans. When somebody in a position of authority asks you, well, are you aware that John broke up with Karen? Your natural assumption is that John broke up with Karen. And so the only question is whether or not you don't question the premise of the question. You're questioning whether or not that individual who's being asked was aware of that as if it was a fact. And the judge cautions the jury not to think of it that way. And she gives some explicit examples. And um, and I guess it's fair game, but I feel like it's tricky. So he just asked a bunch of suggestive questions that would suggest that they were not having a good relationship, that the relationship was rocky, and it is true that nobody knows behind the doors what is really going on between another individual or another couple, and that's all he got out of redirect. Then we had Nicholas Guarino. He was the phone expert who testified on day two, just yesterday. And I think the reason why they broke up his testimony is because it would have been too long and boring. Um, because, but I think honestly, what they should have done is the beginning part of today's testimony, they should have gotten out of the way yesterday, and then just like had him do the big part that I think was what it was all leading to. But anyways, so he resumes his testimony with a series of questions that are geared towards essentially being able to move into evidence cell phone records of calls and text messages between certain individuals who have been surrounding this case, namely John O'Keefe, Karen Reed, Jen McCabe, Carrie Roberts. And so, but he had to do them kind of separately and individually as it pertained to like certain like they were able to get all of Karen's calls incoming and outgoing, and so that would be one set of reports or logs or whatever. So then he would move all of those records into evidence. But then they wanted to isolate Karen's texts with back and forth with John, and so that had to be moved into evidence as its own sort of bundle or document, and then so on and so forth. And so it's kind of long and kind of tedious, but they had to get all of that out of the way in order for ultimately Nicholas Guarino to be able to actually read this particular text exchange between John and Karen on January 28th, which is the night that they all went out to the bar and the evening before John O'Keefe's body was found. And it's super embarrassing to to hear and read because as Nicholas Guarino was reading the text messages, they were also showing images of the text on screen, and boy, this couple was like, they were not in a good place, but they also weren't like they also weren't done with each other, and that was evident, I think. And so spoiler alert, my overall thought about this whole exchange was just that it was either neutral or slightly actually beneficial to Karen, because it actually contradicts some of what the prosecution seems to be alleging, because it starts off early kind of ish in the day, and she's upset because he had said some horrible things to her. And she is trying to figure out where they're at. He is not wanting to take calls from her and whatnot, and she incessantly keeps calling, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, stop calling!" And they can tell the difference between like him just letting a call go to voicemail and ignoring it versus him actually like disregarding a call and like ending it, and so he's doing a combination of both. And then at some point, I don't know what turns, but at some point, John O'Keefe's demeanor and attitude towards her turns. I don't know if they finally talk, but at some point it turns, and he is expecting her to come out that night and in fact come over to his house so that they can all go out together. And that night he was with his friend Michael, or not Michael, yeah, Michael Camerano, who testified earlier, and they had just like taken their girls out to celebrate, and now the two guys were just gonna go hang out and grab a drink and whatnot. And so John invited Karen over so that the three of them could head out together and hang out and stuff. And so it seemed fine. Like he was very standoffish in the morning, and then by the evening, I don't know if they had connected and finally talked, whatever it was. Maybe he was just done with his errands, and so now he's like got a clear head and stuff like that because he was busy during the day. He was taking care of stuff, and so, but then things like flip flop. The whole day she was very clingy and needy and wanted him to take her call or call him for like at least a 2-minute conversation, blah blah blah, and he wasn't willing and whatnot. And then all of a sudden things like there's a little role reversal. I just feel like this couple, having been together for 2 years, it just seemed like they were still playing games. But then Karen, he's like, okay, so are you coming over? And she's like, oh no, I gotta stay because the plumber's coming over. And he's like, and then John says something like, oh, I hope your plumber friend is hot. And I think this was like a topic between them. It's probably like the reprisal of like an argument, a refrain of an argument that keeps coming back. It had the tenor of that. I don't know that for a fact. But so he's got a little bit of a jealous streak too. I mean, everybody talks about Karen being super jealous, not wanting to see John hanging out with other girls, but he made a comment that seemed like he was fairly jealous of this plumber dude who lived kind of close to her, and her hot water wasn't working. And with the snow approaching, she just didn't want to be without hot water. I feel like that's a very adult thing to do, to call a plumber and make sure she was okay for the weekend. And he was mad at her because he was like, I've told you before that my dad and I can take care of it for you, we can get it fixed for you. And I think she said something that was kind of maybe telling of how she thought about him and how she thought about other people in his life. But she said to him something to the effect of, I don't want to put you or your dad out and have you guys go out of your way to do anything that I could just take care of myself, unlike other people in your life. And I feel like maybe her sense is that people are demanding of him, of his time, and he lets them take advantage of him, and she did not want to be one of those people, and if she could help it. And so, they're debating back and forth. And by this time, he's at the bar and he's like, where are you? You coming? What's happening? And she was like, well, I gotta wait for this plumber dude. He said he would be here at 5. It's 8 o'clock or whatever. He's not here yet. And he's like, just leave it. I'll take care of it for you on Sunday or Monday, because that was Friday night. Blizzard was supposed to be hitting Saturday morning, whiteout conditions. And he's like, nobody's driving tomorrow, so I'll come over, I'll take care of it Sunday or Monday. And she's like, Monday? I don't want this to be an issue. I don't want to be without hot water for an entire weekend. And he's like, what do you mean? Aren't you going to be in Canton this weekend? Meaning, he was assuming that she would be hanging out with him at his house, staying over for the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, whatever it was, right? And so he was fully anticipating that she was going to come over, hang out with them, spend the weekend with him and the kids. And in fact, when he headed out to the bar with his friend Michael, he asked Michael to move his car so that he could move his own car outside of the garage. That way, when Karen came over, she would have a straight shot and could pull into the garage. I mean, it seems like a very considerate thing to do, and obviously shows that he was expecting her to come over and hang out with them overnight, because he left the garage. He wanted her to have the garage, and he knew that the storm was coming and nobody would be driving anywhere the following day. And so he was probably expecting her, as he said in the text, he explicitly said it in the text that he thought she would be, he assumed she would be staying over with him all weekend. And so then she like does a total like 180, and she's like, well, you've said that the dynamic between the four of us, meaning him and his niece and nephew, isn't good, so I'm just trying to minimize that. And so it just seemed weird. It seems like she's clingy all day, then he wants to hang out with her, and then she plays hard to get. I mean, that's what I mean. Like, they seem to be playing games with each other. But I think they're clearly like not over each other. They're not, he's not over it. And I think the prosecution is trying to like lean into the fact that it was a bad relationship, which it might have been, and that John was thinking about breaking up with her. But on that night, he wasn't. He was wanting her to come over. He had every excuse to like not be wanting her to come over, not wanting her to come out that night. Especially with the snow coming, he could have just said, hey, just stay at your house, there's just snow coming. It would have been a good out, without being mean, right? But that wasn't the case. He wanted her to come over. He was preparing the garage for her so that she could come over and have the garage. And he was surprised when she, was suggesting that she would be at her place the weekend, because he assumed that she would be at his. So I don't know. I don't think it was a bad. I don't think it was bad. That whole reading of the text exchange, it was kind of like embarrassing and awkward to listen to, but I don't think it was bad for Karen. And kudos to Nicholas Guarino. He read it very neutrally, so I really appreciate that. He just read the words, didn't try to put any emotion into it one way or another. They showed the prosecution then showed several clips from an interview that Karen did with 2020. They've been using those a lot and kind of sprinkling in these like short 5-second clips or whatever. And I didn't really get the sense that it did much damage either. So basically the clips were her explaining how much she had to drink that night. Whatever. She drank. She's an adult. She's allowed to. So I don't know that hurt her too badly. But they kind of figure she's probably not going to take the stand, or maybe they are trying to goad her into taking the stand so that she would have to then be subjected to cross-examination. I sort of think that is what they're playing at, because they're trying to use her own words to impeach her. And so they're putting all of these clips in, and I think they're just egging on either Karen or the defense team to want to put the record straight and have Karen rebut all of that on the stand herself. And if she takes the stand to try to do that, then the prosecution gets to have a crack at her and gets to, cross-examine her. They didn't get to do that the first time. So I feel like if the defense is smart, they're not going to fall for that, and they shouldn't put her on the stand. I think she has a good enough case without her taking the stand, because I actually don't think those clips hurt her much, if at all, really. They just corroborate other things that other people have been saying, so it's not that big a deal. So overall today, I feel like it's kind of neutral, or maybe slightly in favor of Karen, to be honest. I don't think they introduced any bad facts, really. Tomorrow, day 4, I don't know if they're going to have any testimony, but day 4 is also supposed to be field trip day, where they take the jury out to go look at where John was found. And I don't think that is going to be televised at all. If I remember correctly, they didn't televise that in the first trial. So I don't know whether there's going to be anything to really recap for tomorrow. So I guess we'll see. That's kind of it for today. I think overall, I don't feel like they've really gotten the prosecution to the meat of their case in chief yet. So they're just kind of laying the groundwork, laying the foundation for stuff. I think they still have like weeks to go. I think in their presentation of their case. So far, nothing too damaging, and whatever damage folks have done, I think the defense has poked a lot of holes into already, and has done a decent job of discrediting people, or they just kind of discredited them themselves, the witnesses, because oh, actually, since today was a short day, let me actually jump back to day 2, because I did forget. I left it in a comment from yesterday's recap, but I forgot that John O'Keefe's mom testified on day 2. So she was very, very emotional, and she talked about their family, the loss of her daughter to brain cancer, the relationship between her and custodial custody of John's niece and nephew, and her recounting of the events of those couple days. And it was very emotional. She seemed very sad. The defense did not cross-examine her, which I think is smart. You don't want to. There's nothing that you could gain out of that, and but I do think that she was not a very sympathetic witness. Ironically, though, she seemed kind of she seemed well. I feel like I feel sympathy, empathy for her. Nobody should have to go through the loss of any of their children, much less 2 out of the 3 of their children. But I feel like right out of the gates, she seems not very likable to me. She sits on the stand, she says her name as is customary and whatnot, and Brennan, the prosecutor, just, starting to ask some foundational questions, really to try to like ease them in, get them a little comfortable on the stand. So he asks her how long has she been married, and she says, she quips, too long. And I think she laughs, and maybe this is like nervous, I'm a little bit nervous. Let me start with a little joke, break the ice a little bit. But you're testifying in a murder trial. You don't really need to make jokes. It's fine. And then I think he was caught off guard, Brennan was, with regards to her response. And so I think he asks again, or asks for clarification or something. And she goes, I think she says something to the effect of 50 years or over 50 years. Is that long enough? And I'm not sure what she was getting at with that answer either. I was like, lady, why can't you just answer straight? And from that exchange, to be honest, I just felt bad for her husband. I don't know what she's trying to say about her marriage, but I don't think she needed to say it during a murder trial, much less one that's televised, and broadcasted nationwide. So I don't know. I just didn't like her her response, and then throughout the her testimony, it seemed she did not care much for Karen Reed. So there was that much that was evident, and I don't know, maybe that's because of something Karen did or said, whatever. I don't know who's responsible for that, but there's no love lost there. So I think when they were at the hospital, she said herself, John O'Keefe's mom, when she saw Karen, her first response that she said to somebody was, "Why is she here?" Like, well, she's dating your son. That's why. Like, I don't know why. I don't know. Anyway, so it just seemed like there was no they didn't she didn't like Karen that much. And then it just also seemed like the family dynamic was also a little bit weird, because okay, so then besides the fact that of how she answered the question of how long she was married, so kind of weird dynamic between her and her husband, but then also she's like recounting the death of her daughter, the death of John O'Keefe, and she was like talking about who lives where, and Brendan had asked, where do you live, and where you live now, where did you live, blah blah blah, and there's like a little bit of a history, and she's like talking about stuff, and then at some point, I can't remember the exact context of how this came up, but she's talking about her daughter and John, and in very like emotional, loving way, because she lost both of those kids. And then at some point she says, and then Paul was there, like an after thought. Oh yeah, and I have this third kid. Her only surviving kid, by the way. The youngest also, which normally is like the precious baby of the family. But I don't know what the dynamic is, but she said, it was the only time she mentioned Paul, her only surviving child, her youngest child, and she mentioned him as like an afterthought. Oh, and Paul was there. And then that was the extent of, it was really awkward. It was very strange. And so I don't know if there were, favorites, in the family dynamic, but parents are humans, right? They can love their children differently. It doesn't mean like more or less or whatever, but people aren't robots. They're not going to treat, a parent is not, just because they're a parent, going to treat all of their kids exactly in the same way. And that's not warranted either. Some kids, every child, every person is different and needs different things, and you might have to respond differently to them. It doesn't necessarily mean you love them any more or less, but you might not treat them all the same. And I don't know that it just seemed like a weird dynamic. It seemed weird how she phrased that. How much of it is just like, okay, the weirdness of being on trial and having to ask these very personal questions in a very public setting is, I don't know. Maybe it's a little bit that, but to me, she came off a little bit unlikable for those reasons. And I'm glad that the defense didn't like find any need to cross-examine her, because you don't really need to beat up on the victim's mom. There's just there's nothing that could have been gained by that. Okay, so that completes day 3 and what I missed from my day 2 recap, and we'll see whether there's anything to recap tomorrow, which is day 4. But thanks for tuning in to these recaps. If you've been watching them or listening to them and enjoy them, I hope you'll hit that like button. If you aren't already, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel, and please feel free to share this out too, and get us on the map as a true crime podcast. Our next podcast live stream will be on Alex Murdaugh. This will be Killer Cards episode 4 on April 28th. So I hope you'll join me and Wendy as we tell you all about the Alex Murdaugh case. Thanks again, and have a great day. Bye.